If you like to make your NFL games a little bit more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. The number one NFL betting podcast in the galaxy. I'm claiming that. People tell us we're that. I don't know if we really are or not, but I'm claiming it. And the primary reason is because love my guy, Steve Fezzik, co-host at Fezzik Sports, the only two-time winner of the Super Contest out there in Vegas. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. I know a lot of you know that. Highly encourage you to check out the other shows that we have on the platform, College Draft Podcast. We are all over the draft picks for every team. Yesterday was the AFC East. And remember, that show transitions to being a college football betting podcast once the season starts. Thought Chris Nowinski was very informative on yesterday's Ross Tucker football podcast. If you guys are curious at all about CTE and football and where things are, man, that was excellent. We got to bring him back. I mean, I just didn't feel like we got to enough stuff with Warren Sharp last week. So we're bringing him back. He is the schedule inequality, schedule rest disparity maven. You can check him out on social media at Sharp Football. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. Our network is at Ross Tucker Pod. Here's what we'll do. We'll finish up the conversation with Warren because I felt like there was a couple more things I wanted to ask him that we didn't get into last week, Steve. Then I want to get your reaction to the things that Warren said, plus curious where you're at with these NBA games as we're getting closer and closer to the NBA Finals. But let's ask Warren a few more things about what's going on here with some of these teams from a rest disparity, tough stretches. Which teams have some especially tough stretches? All right, so Warren, we wanted to bring you back because I didn't feel like we got into as many of the individual game situations as I wanted to last week, right? So last week we talked more in general. We talked about some specific teams. Now, we did get to some games like the Bengals, again, playing against the Ravens on the road on a short week. But what I know Steve salivates at and is really into is especially unique rest disparities, right? And I know from reading your stuff at Sharp Football Analysis that there are some games where teams have significant rest advantage in those games.
Yeah, there are. What I've done also is I've gone through, and some of this content, actually, we'll have this up by the time this show posts, the top 5 toughest stretches that all the league will face this year. And so I've ranked the teams based upon their win totals, looked at their schedule, and looked at some of the most difficult stretches. And so an interesting team is like, I'll just throw out an example, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Pittsburgh Steelers play a easier schedule than average the first 6 weeks. But once week 7 starts, they go to play their international game in Dublin, Ireland for the first time in NFL history. They come home, they get to host maybe Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns in that first game back after a bye week. So they've got one of the earliest byes of any team. Starting in week 7, they have the toughest schedule for any team down the stretch. So an interesting team, if you're looking at them from a futures market, maybe they do well, then you decide to sell some of the Pittsburgh Steelers shares that you have after they maybe fare well against the Bengals or the Cleveland Browns in week 6 at home. Week 7 onwards, toughest schedule in the NFL. Second toughest schedule of rest games in the NFL. And during this time, not only are they playing brutal opponents, they have brutal rest situations in some of these games, specifically against the most difficult opponents that they're going to deal with. So, for example, they're playing the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens in back-to-back weeks during this stretch. They have -3 day rest disadvantage in both of those games. Week 13 against the Bills. They have a minus 3-day rest disadvantage. And the very next week they play in Baltimore and also have a minus 3-day rest disadvantage. That's a difficult thing later on in the season after having a very early bye and you're playing a lot of tough games. And then you go into these games and you're playing tough teams, but also with a rest disadvantage. They also have 2 games later, they play in Detroit off of a Monday Night Football game. So they're on the road after a Monday night game. That's a 1-day rest disadvantage. It's one of those games that the Lions play 5 teams off of Monday Night Football. So in a 4-week span, you're playing the Bills, the Ravens, and the Lions, 3 of the teams that are supposed to be the best in the NFL, and you have a rest disadvantage in all 3 of those games. In addition, they're playing the Cincinnati Bengals on a short week, Thursday Night Football. They're in Cincinnati, so it's a difficult overall schedule for the Pittsburgh Steelers down the stretch.
This is the second year in a row, Steve. Their schedule's been horrific in the second half of the year. And last year, they got off to a good start. People are like, oh, see, the Steelers are good. And then eventually their schedule caught up to them. Feels like they're primed and ready for another one. By the way, I think their quarterback will probably be banged up by that time of the year too.
And Ross, when Warren says sell some shares in Pittsburgh, you don't have to have ever bought any shares.
True.
I'm not buying any shares. But basically what Warren's saying is that at the end of week 6, after they beat Cleveland, go to the adjusted season win market. Don't bet the Steelers under 8.5 wins. Now, let's wait and let's bet them under 9.5 after week 6. That's a more likely number if they start out well, and then watch them crumble when they face the second straight year of a gauntlet late year schedule.
Got it. And the thing that jumped out reading your article, Warren, is, and obviously you're very successful betting NFL, but these rest disparities, because I've always said to you, how much evidence is there that it really makes a difference? But the numbers, via the rest disparity, against the spread, they're significant. They're statistically significant. Like, it's funny because we talk about this sometimes with Dr. Chow and his, medical advantage, right? Like his medical rankings for each team. But if all we did, Warren, was just bet rest disparities, how would we do?
Well, I shared some of the numbers. The key is what to focus on. If previously you were betting bye weeks and including bye weeks into the rest disparity games, and those are the ones that you're betting, you have lost on those games over the last decade, especially the last 6-7 years, because those used to be such solid bets at 56%, just betting on teams coming off of a bye, that the market began to then adjust. Bettors took advantage of that. And the lines, even if they're shifting a 0.5 point on average or 0.6 points on average, it does factor into the results here. And then the advantage hasn't been there because of the CBA. And so that's dwindled. So the key is, if you're looking at just rest in a vacuum and zooming out to 20,000 feet and just trying to say, what is rest? You're not going to have nearly the level of success if you focus on certain situational spots, like I'm mentioning in the article. Those teams, it only happens once this year. But let me see if I got my notes on hand here. The 3 games in 10 days for the Dallas Cowboys, that spot has rarely happened. But the teams that are in the third game of the 3 and 10, I want to say there's something like 3-11, 3-10 ATS over the last, 10 years. It hasn't happened very much, but those teams are horrific plays in that third game. These short week road games, that's another spot where you would want to be betting against the team that's on the short week road game. I also looked at teams that are just simply off of Monday Night Football. I forget this number because it's in the article. You can look it up yourself at Sharp Football Analysis. You can look up what teams are off of those Monday Night Football games. That also has been a slight edge. I want to say a 5% ROI over the last decade of betting against teams coming off of Monday Night Football. So if you know what you're looking for specifically, you're going to find some better winning opportunities. Another team that we should discuss here real quick is the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings have the third worst stretch of any team in the NFL from a strength of opponent factor. They're going to be dealing with as soon as they come off of this doubleheader internationally, which I've heard Steve before, respect his work a lot. Lots of times he's talking about, a team that's on the road for a little bit. And this is in all sports. And so this is one thing, Ross, that I think is important to just interject here, is that rest is not some sort of novel thing just for the NFL to take advantage of. Rest is something that if you are a successful handicapper, these situational spots, you're incorporating that if you're betting basketball, if you're betting baseball sometimes. Like, this is something that's widely known and widely taken advantage of, is betting rest situational spots in sports. And it's not just me identifying this as like, hey, we're talking about for the first time. So, I know the NFL might try to downplay, hey, rest doesn't matter. It's all even. Like, just roll the ball's out there, gets kicked off, and it's fair. It's not the case in the NFL nor any other sport. There is something to account for. Minnesota, what I'm talking about with Steve is Minnesota plays back-to-back international games. Now, we like that for that second game where they're playing the Cleveland Browns because they're already on the road, right? So they don't have to deal with all that travel. However, when they come home, they have a bye week. And so they're 2 straight games internationally, and then they're back home with a bye. Then they have to play the Philadelphia Eagles, the very next game out of the bye, which is obviously one of the best teams in the NFL. And that kicks off these 4 games. Philadelphia on the road, West Coast, against the Los Angeles Chargers on Thursday night football. So a short week road game halfway across the country, playing where your circadian biorhythm is off because you're playing at night on the West Coast. Then you're playing in Detroit. And then you're playing the Baltimore Ravens on, that's a home game against the Baltimore Ravens. You have minus 3 days rest disadvantage, though, in both of those last 2 games. Against the Detroit Lions because they're off of a bye, and against the Baltimore Ravens, who played, I think, the prior Thursday. So that 4-game stretch for the Minnesota Vikings after they come back from their back-to-back international games is going to be very interesting, because not only are they playing tough opponents, the third toughest schedule of opponents over a 4-week stretch that any team will face, but they've got these situational rest disadvantages as well.
And think about this, Ross. You're playing at 6:30 in the morning, maybe, I'm guessing, in the UK, and now you're playing at 6:30 at night Pacific time. These are all Pacifics. When you're playing on the West Coast for a night game, potentially, or certainly late in the afternoon. So there's that's a lot of body adjustments to have to do.
You know what else is interesting, Warren? You guys realize the Cowboys, this will be an interesting experiment moving forward. The Cowboys have 4 weekends off this season. So if you're an NFL player, right, you get the weekend off if you have a bye, and you get the weekend off if you have a Thursday game, unless you have another Thursday game. Well, they do have one regular week where it's back-to-back Thursdays, but they have 3 Thursday games where they get the weekend off, and they have a bye week. So as an NFL player, like, it used to be the greatest thing ever, your bye weekend. You only really got, to Warren's point earlier in the show and last week, you only got, like, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off back in the day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you practiced. And then I remember in Buffalo, Mike Mularkey, 2004, we practiced on Friday of the bye week. So we were making fun of it. We were calling it the bye day because we really only got Saturday off because you had to come back Sunday for Monday morning meetings. You really only got Saturday off that whole time. Now the Cowboys, these guys have 4 weekends off. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, it's good from a rest standpoint, but those guys might get after it on those weekends. I don't know where they're going to go or what they're going to do, but like that will be something to keep an eye on. Listen.
Speaking on the just one quick nugget on the Cowboys, just an anecdote, is that this was a team, I mentioned how difficult it is to play on the road on a Thursday. And so I made a stink about this probably 5 years ago. And some NFL teams, specifically, I won't mention the teams, they might be in the same division as the Cowboys, reached out and got some research and presented their case to the league as to why do the Cowboys never have to go on the road on Thursday? Because they're always hosting those games because of Thanksgiving. They're playing these home Thursday games. So what the NFL tried to do then for the next couple of years, and they did it this year as well, but it doesn't... They send them on the road the next Thursday. So they play at home on Thursday, Thanksgiving, but then they go on the road the next Thursday. Well, they still have a week off to get ready for that game. That's not a short week road game on Thursday. They do play the Philadelphia Eagles on the road on Thursday, but that's week 1 of the season. So they don't have to deal with a short week in that sense as well. But I believe that Christmas is on a Thursday. And that means the Dallas Cowboys will be playing in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, week 17. So not only do the Dallas Cowboys play 4 Thursday games, as you mentioned, Ross, and have those 4 weekends off, 3 of those games are on the road, but only one of those 3 is actually a short week road game where they're going to be traveling and having a slight disadvantage in that regard.
Listen, I said it last week. I'm going to say it again. You got to get the book, okay? I mean, you got to get the book. It is incredible. Sharp.football. There is nobody else like him. He literally gets hired by teams to do projects for them because he's that sharp. Is that your real last name, or is that like a stage name?
That's part of the deal. It's along with the mustache.
Part of the deal.
I love it.
But as it relates, if you're on sharp.football, make sure that you're using the code ROSS, ROSS, to give yourself that book for only $1. And this is not going to last long, so take advantage of it.
Love it. Sharp.football. Use code Ross. Check him out on social media at Sharp Football. Going to dive into some of these single games now with Steve. Warren, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it again this week.
Hey, I always love coming on your show, Ross.
We're almost in June, which means it's almost beach time most weekends for your boy, which means it's yummy, yummy Smirnoff in my tummy. I've told you guys before, I drink it with like Gatorade Zero or hydration drinks or like Pedialyte. It's perfect. I'm hydrating while I'm drinking delicious Smirnoff vodka, the #1 vodka in the world and an official vodka partner of the NFL. And it's not expensive. It's not one of these crazy expensive vodkas out there. Grab a bottle of Smirnoff at your local retailer and head to Smirnoff.com to find recipes of delicious cocktails perfect for game day. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain. It's 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please not share with anyone under legal drinking age. All right, so Steve, you heard everything Warren just had to say, okay? So before we get to the NBA stuff, you know, whether it's the Steelers having that brutal stretch after week 7 or some of the things he said last week about the Lions' advantages, what would you recommend our listeners, the people watching, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, how would you recommend they take action or at least have kind of like a plan of attack or strategy at this point?
All right, let's talk some season wins in the NFC. If you recall from previous shows, I've spoken about how I like playing season win unders, specifically for the NFC because the teams only get 8 home games. Well, I'm going to take 2 of those teams off my list based on what Warren said, the 49ers and Detroit, because of the easy schedule for the Niners and all of the rest disparity for Detroit. Let's go ahead. Now, if you just heard the Warren Sharp analysis, you'd say, let's play them over. I don't like playing overs, Ross. The money is to be made playing unders. So let's scratch those 2 teams off our list. And now let's look at other teams in the NFC. We're going to selectively look to play under later this summer, but taking both those teams off my list.
Isn't it interesting? I thought the conversation about, you know, Warren, obviously, it's funny because Warren's successful betting, but he prioritizes more trying to make things as equitable as possible. And you would think, Steve, for me, as a former player, that I would want things to be as equitable as possible. And I do. But to be honest with you, it's a business. Like I'm most concerned with them getting the best ratings possible to make the most money possible because the players get 50 cents on every dollar. You know what I mean? Like it's like the old thing, Steve. If someone said to me before the season, Ross, you can be on an 8-8 team and not make the playoffs and make $1 million, or be on a 10-6 team and make the playoffs and make $800,000, give me the $1 million. You know what I mean? Like, I'm doing this as my job, right? Like, so I think people lose sight of that sometimes. But what's interesting, Steve, to your point, the Lions, 8 games where they have a rest advantage. The Niners, who have historically had some really tough schedules and stretches, now they have the greatest the easiest schedule comparatively. What happens is people, I don't know if the Niners are going to bounce back and the Lions lose both their coordinators. Well, next thing you know, it'll be December and those teams will have exceeded expectations and a lot of people won't exactly be sure why. Well, we kind of know why, right?
Yeah, and, fast forward to 2026, those are 2 teams I probably want to bet against because they had it so good this year, right? That they're going to be overrated, overvalued based upon an easy schedule. And even looking into the playoffs this year, they'll have a better record than they really deserve. Hey, one thing I want to mention also, this is what works for me. Everyone's different. I don't really jump to play games of the year. I can play them. I'll play them selectively at DraftKings. But in terms of these rest disparity plays that Warren gives us in his analysis, I get a copy from, I go down to Circa and they'll put out a packet of every game of the year. DraftKings does it as well. Print out the whole schedule and I will go through and have a highlighter and I'll just identify the games where there's a big rest disparity because I know all this is going to be forgotten. What is that from Blade Runner? It's all going to be forgotten, like Tears and Rain. All this analysis. Once the season starts, come week 13, the odds makers are just going to set their lines based upon power ratings at home field and nothing else. So you're going to get plenty of chances, kicks at the can, if you will, to be able to bet this stuff later on once everybody's dealing it and shop for the very best number. But you're going to be so busy betting college football, college basketball, NBA by December that you'll have forgotten. So that's what works for me. Highlight all those really good spots on the schedule, and it's there for me when I open up week 12 or whatever week we wind up betting.
So that was going to be my question. So I know over the next few weeks, you'll have, some of your bets of the week for each week. I really enjoy it. Like next week we'll dive into, some of the week 1 games that you like. Because correct me if I'm wrong, week 1 you feel differently. Week 1 there is no rest disparity, but also week 1, are the lines already pretty sharp for week 1?
They are. In fact, if you asked me what's one bet that I would make right now in week 1, I'd probably play the Chargers. I would probably play Kansas City -2.5 in Brazil against the Chargers. But you know what? My power ratings say it's the correct play, but I'm playing against the Super Bowl hangover trend where teams that lose the Super Bowl don't do well week 1. And I'm playing against another trend where divisional dogs, that would be the Chargers, do very well. So I'm bucking 2 trends right there, but I feel the line's going to go to 3, so I want to get ahead of it. So that's the one line I would play Kansas City -2.5.
Steve, what did you think about what Warren said quickly about bye weeks actually not being helpful, actually being the opposite from a betting standpoint? Did you know that? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I knew teams at home, especially off the bye, don't do well, and it just makes sense. You only get 1 week off. It's so difficult to be a professional football player. That's a special time to celebrate when you get 4 days off, right, Ross?
Oh my gosh. It's like the greatest to have that. Because remember, okay, it's every day starting like July 25th. Like there are no off days. The days they give you off, that just means you go in and leave on your own time. You're not really off. You still have to go in there and do stuff. So to actually get a couple of true days off is amazing. All right. What about, before we wrap up the show, NBA playoffs, Steve? So the Thunder are up 3-1 after last night. We got game 4 tonight of the Pacers and Knicks. Do you have any bets for the people on either one of those series?
Yeah, so I actually like the total on New York and Indy. I think it's going to go under. I think the Knicks know they're not as deep. They got to slow it down, muck it up, and they won't play with the pace that the Pacers want to play at. I also think the Pacers are going to win game 4. I would bet the Pacers -2. Think about this. Game 3, greatest spot in the world for the Knicks. Down 0-2, zig-zig-zag, need the game like blood. They get it, but they were down 20. And the spread on that game was just Indiana minus 1.5. Now there's been the most modest adjustment. Now Indiana's only minus 2. Now it's a good spot for Indy. That the last thing they want to do is give away what was a 2-0 edge and go back even to New York. Pacers are going to win tonight.
Why does it seem like there's any home court advantage in the NBA?
Well, there is when Oklahoma City plays, because take a look at their games and how they struggled in Minnesota, and now they're going to blast.
But Minnesota. They won on the road last night. All 3 road teams have won, Pacers, Knicks. It just didn't used to be that way. It used to be hard to win on the road.
Yeah, maybe better officiating, just the not getting, and you can review bad calls on top of it. So I don't think the home team gets as many calls as they used to in the past.
We've got some exciting guests coming up over the next few weeks. Plus, we'll dive into some of your email questions, which have been great. Ross@rosstucker.com, and some of Steve's games of the year every week. Some of the NFL games he likes based on some of those rest disadvantages that we find out from our guy Warren. Steve's getting the highlighter out. You're not going to want to miss it. Other than that, good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money.
Thanks for tuning in to Even Money. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.